Businesses that have a good culture and strong leadership have been shown to be anywhere from 4 to 7 times the revenue of those that don't.
You're within a room full of 10 different team members that are all feeling slightly different. How do you read their minds to work out who's got a facade on, who's being very vulnerable, and who's actually genuinely okay?
Look, leadership is like anything else. It's a sport, right? You've got to train for it. If you've got the culture right within your organization, you can get 23% higher profitability, 17% higher productivity, 78% less churn in terms of absenteeism from staff members.
Muhami Matters with Chris Adams, powered by CJA Consulting.
Hello, welcome to Muhami Matters, where credibility meets clarity in legal and professional services. I'm your host, Chris Adams, founder of Muhami and CJA Consulting. Now, growth should make life easier, should be more revenue, more people, more momentum. But for many professional services leaders, the opposite actually happens. Growth becomes heavier, direction blurs, what once worked starts to strain under pressure. Today, we're exploring why growth often becomes harder before it becomes sustainable, and what leadership shift is required to navigate that phase successfully. Joining me today is Chris Paton, Managing Director of Quirk Solutions in the UK and Middle East. Chris works with organisations on leadership, culture and performance, particularly when scale begins to expose the cracks that weren't actually there before, or at least weren't visible before. We're going to talk about transition, failure, leadership evolution, and how firms can avoid becoming stuck in a very, very growth they work so hard to create. Chris, welcome to Muhami Matters.
That's Chris. Lovely to be on, and makes life a lot easier with both of us being Chris.
It's going to be slightly, interesting, but hopefully everyone can tell our voices apart. So for those who don't know you, can you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us how you got to Dubai?
I have a military background, so I did nearly 18, 19 years in the Royal Marines, traveling around all of the holiday hotspots of the world for that time, and then found myself accidentally published in Harvard Business Review, which led to people asking me to speak at conferences whilst I was still serving. And that seemed like all of a sudden quite an interesting and exciting new life. So I jumped across, set up my own business. That was back in 2012. So for the last 13, nearly 14 years now, I've been building out a business within the UK, Europe, North America. But a few years ago, we were contracted to do all the leadership development and operational readiness for the Dubai Expo. And that led to us getting a footprint in the region. And things have grown since then. So it got to the point where it made sense to incorporate here as well. So now I straddle 2 businesses, one here and one in the UK.
So when we met a few weeks ago, you talked about some of the experiences you had in the military, which were confronting for you at the time, I think, and what many of us will hopefully never ever experience. I've seen a lot of good people that have transitioned from the military into private commercial life that seem to really, really thrive. So how did your transition from your military career into more of a commercial life, if we can call it that, how did that go? How did that come about?
It was a complete car crash.
Really?
Yeah. So I'd got to this point, obviously, where I was bouncing around giving these speeches. And when, for the last 15, 16 years, you've flown, let's say, to New York in the back of a C-130 at -10 most of the way for 15 odd hours. And all of a sudden somebody's flying you business class, lie flat bed. You do start to realize things are options are developing. So I started to ask around some friends, and just quietly, without exposing too much, saying, look, I'm thinking about leaving the Royal Marines and thinking about leaving the military. what sort of options are out there. And a good friend who's still a very good friend, who said, look, I've just invested in this legal startup, and 4 others have invested in it as well. It's essentially a call center, a legal call center, an advice line. So the concept was that you would ring through to this number, and through a series of filters, and speaking to different people, you'd end up at the right point with the right level of advice. And they had a business model that they were ready to go with, but they didn't really have a strategy for the business. They didn't really have an operational plan to deliver the business. And they didn't have anybody to run the business on a day-to-day basis because they were all investors and business people elsewhere. So long story short, the offer was made to me after interviewing with everybody that if I put together the strategy and the plan and came in to do that, then we would all start off with an equal footing. And I really liked that idea. A number of my friends had gone into other big, large enterprises, corporates, or big institutions. But I like the idea of being in something a bit smaller, a bit more nimble, somewhere that I could have more of an influence. So I accepted, was very happy, spent the next 6 months doing market research and producing the strategy and a plan for the business, as well as in the day job, getting 11,000 people out of Afghanistan, because that happened to be my day job at the time as head of strategy on Afghanistan, within the UK MOD and government. And was very excited about the whole thing, to be honest. And then about 3 days before I was due to leave the military, and obviously everything by that point is taken momentum of its own, one of the partners ran off with the whole enterprise.
Oh my goodness.
Everybody's money, and 6 months of my time. So it was a bit of a challenge, obviously. I felt very betrayed. It was quite a shock. I had to go and have a horrible conversation with my wife because she never wanted me to leave the military in the first place. She was very proud of me doing what I had been doing. And now I had to go back and say, this thing I've been trying to convince you is going to happen, or it's not going to happen anymore. And obviously you don't have then time to go out and interview and recruit and find jobs and go through that whole process, right? You've got a family to look after. So essentially I just looked at it and went, well, the one option that's glaringly obvious here is that I set up my own thing. If people are interested in what I've been saying at speeches, maybe they'll be interested in what I could say as a business. So rather arrogantly, I set up Quirk Solutions with just Chris Paton in it. And yeah, it's basically grown since there. But that was essentially the transition. It was a series of catastrophic events rather than a plan.
And over what time period did all this happen?
So the pathway, if you like, and the glide path out of the military was quite steady, and I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the challenge of a commercial problem, because up until this point, I'd spent 18, nearly 19 years doing military problems, and I was enjoying applying myself to that. So that 6 months was quite enjoyable. And the partner that ran off with the whole business actually took my strategy to market and got £2 million worth of investment into the business. So clearly it was a half decent strategy and commercial strategy. The period from the sort of the shock into what we're going to do, that was probably actually initially just a few weeks. I kick into gear pretty quickly, as a lot of people would do, regardless of background, I think, but particularly with a military background. If you spent a lot of time in pretty testing environments, when something goes wrong or something goes bang, you don't really spend a lot of time dwelling on it. You immediately kick into, what do we do now? And so that's essentially what I did. I kicked into a couple of weeks of what do I do now? Let's make this happen. And, more or less within a month, I was starting to work with the first client. Now, there were obviously a lot of ups and downs that then followed over the next 2 years, 3 years, because I, at that point, was very inexperienced at business and at growing my own business, and then, trying to balance business development and pipeline with delivery. When it's only one person on your own, that's tough, even if you know what you're doing. When you don't know what you're doing, it's even tougher. So there were definitely points where I was sitting there thinking, what is going on? Why am I doing this? How am I meant to make this work? But slowly we started to get more of a reputation, and we started to land some really big corporate enterprise level clients. And once that started to happen, you get a reputation, you start to get referrals, people start talking about you. That then allowed me to start to bring in people to the business to support the business. And obviously I focused initially very much on fee earning people who were able to go out there and actually deliver the work, and we could charge for them. But then as you go further and further into that journey, you start to bring in cost centers as well, and people that are actually what would be regarded as an overhead, but you need to make the whole thing work.
The experience that all business owners have at some point, if as long as they go beyond being a solo practitioner or a solo business, then we all go through that position where we need to just grow that little bit more.
Yeah.
So it sounds like during that time there was a lot of that fight or flight feeling going on. You've obviously spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and some other holiday destinations, as you call it. How was that? How was that? I don't mean this flippantly, but how was that experience of that rug being swept out from under your feet commercially versus what you'd had to deal with out, I guess, in the field or in your experience? Was it a similar feeling, or was it is it too flippant what I'm asking, I guess?
No, not at all. It's not flippant at all. It's a very sound question, So I guess the first thing is that, for me, it was quite a schism with what I'd been used to before. There are plenty of people in the military who aren't particularly high performing, should we say, as well as high performing people. So it's not like the military is this perfection. It's just like any other society or business or organization. There's good people, there's bad people, there's people in between. But the one thing that does tend to run through the military is trust and loyalty. And that's because essentially you all know that you're all reliant on each other for each other and for your lives. So trust is a big thing, and trust doesn't tend to be betrayed. So having gone from that environment straight into something where almost immediately trust and loyalty was betrayed was quite tough to deal with psychologically, because it just wasn't anything I had any experience of at all up until that point. So that was quite a challenge. But in terms of dealing with the situation and the aftermath, that was very similar to being in the military. I can remember being in situations where, myself and a friend were sitting down because we were handing over jobs between each other, and we're sitting down on a bench just inside of a wall in Afghanistan, and a suicide bomber blew themselves up just on the other side of the wall, and we're kind of sat there with all of the dust and slightly deafened and gazing at each other. And when we kind of got our wits together, he went, "Well, that was pretty disappointing, wasn't it?" It's just that, so that ability to bounce back was exactly the same. It was the psychological impact, I guess, for me. And it took me quite a long time after that to instinctively trust people in the commercial world because of that initial experience.
Yes, again, I certainly wouldn't flippantly want to compare being in business to being in a war zone, but I can see from what you've explained, there are some synergies between there when you, from what you've experienced, where you were betrayed by that person, and that was your livelihood that was being put at stake, and all the time you invested and all the effort, and you were kind of left with nothing and thinking, okay, well, what do I do now? I need to take action. I need to do something.
Yeah.
And trying to, I guess, deal calmly with the outcome of that. So you managed to turn it around quite quickly. You managed to keep a steady head. So what did you think that period taught you about leadership in business?
You need to be adaptable. You need to be nimble. You need to be able to react and understand what's going on very swiftly. That you need to find the sources of information that help you as quickly as you can. In the military, I was used to having exceptional levels of high quality information at my fingertips, able to help me make decisions. When I'm head of planning all operations in Helmand, in Afghanistan, I have a whole array of feeds that are helping me and people who are very specialized in synthesizing all of that information to give me the best possible advice. Whereas in the commercial world, you're quite often hunting around for that and looking where you can. Now, obviously the advent of things like machine learning and AI has helped enormously because you can ask the questions. You've got to be careful of the accuracy of the information you get back.
True.
But you can now start to get a lot better information and a lot swifter. But that was the first thing was getting used to operating in a poor information state and having to make decisions in and around that. So the other thing I think that came through about leadership in the commercial world was understanding people's intrinsic or extrinsic motivators. And as you grow a business and as you bring more people into the business, inevitably everybody's different. And so learning as well to lead through little things, lead each person as an individual rather than trying to lead the whole team as if it was a homogenous mass. That's something else that, was quite key. And whether, you've got somebody who is very driven by, say, commission or, bonuses or whatever else that might be, and who else is driven by actually wanting to make a difference and that sort of purposeful approach to life. And that's where, again, I think leadership in the commercial world needs to be quite subtle and nuanced because, we'll talk a lot about, and you'll hear, podcasts around the world talking about the importance of purpose and of values and things like that. But actually, not everybody has the same purpose. Not everybody has the same values. Not everybody is driven by the same things. So I think those are important, but it's also important to understand that we really need to meet each individual where they are and lead each individual rather than trying to lead the organization, because that tends to make us lazy and treat it as a blob. Rather than the harder bit, which is how is each individual reacting here?
So how do you then deal with each individual? If you're leading a company of 10,000 people, or like you said in Afghanistan, you're leading 10, 11,000 people, how do you address the individual's needs while still keeping, a broad perspective of what's happening across the company, in inverted commas?
So the challenge I think that most growing businesses face is how to do this, and as they scale, because if they've been involved in the business for quite a while, then they're still hungry for the life that was rather than the life that is, and they prefer to be in a culture and a mindset of the starting point, which, there's 4 cultural quadrants to any organization, right? There's a framework called the Competing Values Framework, which was created by a couple of academics called Cameron and Quinn in the early 2000s. And that says that you have these cultural quadrants of create, first of all. So that's very innovative, risk-taking, entrepreneurial. It's all about new developments, new products and services. It's exciting. It's full of energy. Then you have a collaborative quadrant, which is about nurturing, mentoring, about relationships within the business, about looking after people. You have a quadrant that is all about control. So this is about process and systems, and making sure that things are working efficiently and you have a structure to them. And then you have a quadrant which is all about competing, achieving, winning, hitting targets, hitting numbers. And the truth is that every organization has a presence in all 4 of those quadrants. It just depends on how much of a presence in each of those quadrants that makes up the overall culture. But as they scale, businesses tend to go through a pathway from those quadrants in the path I've just described. They start off very creative, innovative, entrepreneurial. Then they become this bonded team because they like where they are and what they're doing. Then they realize, well, we've got to start having some structure and some process here to tie this up and tidy this up. And then they start focusing on the market and competition and everything else like that. And as you go around that, it requires a leader to understand that they are going around that process. And many of them will still hanker for that entrepreneurial, innovative, or family feel before it becomes structured. So trying to understand where you are on that journey is really important. And developing skills, you wouldn't expect anybody other than somebody who does leadership training, right, to talk about this. But I do think it's really important because a lot of leaders, particularly in, let's say we're talking about a scale up business now. Okay, so it's proven its place. It's doing quite well. It's maybe been up and running for 5-6 years. And it's now looking to really accelerate onto the next level. The senior leadership teams within that organization, their experience up until that point and within the business to that point will likely be quite operational leadership. They're in the heart of things, fixing problems in the heart of things. And that's what they understand. That's what they enjoy. That's what they want to do. But there's this phrase of experts create bystanders. And the problem with that type of leadership is that the rest of the team sit back because they're going to allow the expert to take charge. And so as you are trying to then scale the business, because the leaders will know they want to scale the business and grow the business, and maybe they are scaling the business, whether it's organically or whether it's through acquisitions, whatever it might be, they're bolting in more and more stuff and more people, and the organization's getting bigger, but you still have an operational leadership mindset. And that is stopping the leadership, the senior leadership, from becoming more strategic. And it's also preventing the people beneath them from growing and developing and taking on. So a very long-winded way of answering your question, I believe that the way to enable you to have that personal connection and lead people individually as an organization gets bigger is what the military used to call intent, use of intent and things like freedom in a framework, or we used to call it mission command within the military, where I'm not actually trying to understand individually all 10,000 people in my organization. I am wanting to understand the 6 or 7 people who are direct to me, and also the, let's say it's 15, 16 people as the layer below them. And I am setting out my intent. And my intent is not we're going to do this, you're going to do that. And I know that sounds odd from an ex-military leader, right? It's my intent is this is where I want us to end up, right? It's that definition of intention. It's an intention to get somewhere. This is where intending to go. And that means it now becomes flexible. It becomes supple because you're not tied to something very specific that if you don't achieve it, you fail. It's allowing you to adapt as you go along. This is where I'm intending to get to. This is how I see us getting there in broad order. We're going to be high risk, highly aggressive, make lots of acquisitions, right? I had one organization that I worked with who made 20 acquisitions in a 2-year period. That is a particularly, aggressive and determined approach. I've had other organizations that I've worked with who want to grow quite steadily without too much risk. That's a very different approach. But by setting that out as the leader, what that allows the team below me to do is to look at that and go, right, okay, well, what's my part in Chris's plan? How am I now going to enable this? And all I do as the leader is I give each of those people a framework that I allow them to have freedom of decision-making and freedom of choice within. So now I have set out the what and the why, but I'm leaving them to come up with the how. And that allows me the headspace to then check on them individually, keep an eye on them, help them, support them, remove blockages that they're coming up against because I've sensed them and I'm working with them rather than being too involved in it myself. And they do the same thing. Their people do the same thing. So your whole organization ends up aligned towards the same point because everybody is getting that intent, but the intent is different at different levels of the organization. So it applies to everybody right the way through. And now, at the very forefront of delivery, at let's say the 10,000th person in this business, you have got something that's been told to you by the team leader of your team of 6 that makes sense to you, resonates with you and clicks. It's not a company mission and vision statement that has absolutely no connection with what you do on a day-to-day basis.
So that all makes really good sense. I guess what I'm wondering is how do you know at what point you need to start switching your intent to these very different styles? So one thing that strikes me, the people I work with, for example, they know that there's an issue where they themselves as founders or as a senior partner or whatever it may be, start to find that they're getting overwhelmed. They're trying to do the operational stuff as well as trying to get the clients and keep the existing clients happy. And it all starts to become a massive burden, and perhaps it stops feeling energizing and they start feeling like they're just sinking.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good point where you need to look at the intent that you've been talking about. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I think it is right, but I think potentially even earlier. The point at which you're finding yourself thinking this is all a bit miserable and I'm no longer really enjoying this. I'm finding it as a grind, but I'm getting through each day because I can sense that the business is going somewhere. You're probably already a bit late. Because cultures become ingrained and behaviors become ingrained within organizations very quickly, and then they become really difficult to change. And we cast a leadership shadow, and a big leadership shadow. How we act, how we behave, what we say, what we do, what we reward, what we incentivize, all of that influences immediately the people that we're working with. And so thinking about how I'm going to enable this organization to scale from a people perspective, not a processes, not, operationalizing it, not pipeline, not sales, but operationalizing it from a people, behaviors, and culture perspective, and thinking about that really early on is key. For me, it's about tying together strategy, leadership, and culture, right? Organizations sometimes don't have a strategy. All right. Those people should see me after class. But
Yeah.
organizations that do have a strategy, and as their strategy changes, should be thinking, right, my strategy has now changed because we've got to this level or whatever it might be. And here's the next level we're aiming for. So what does that mean now for the leadership that I need and the culture that I need? Because it's going to be different. And it's by enabling the people within the organization to develop their own leadership and their own talent that you are able then to keep that feeling of this is actually still enjoyable. I'm still getting a lot from this because I've got that sense of being in charge of an engine now, and an engine is now driving the business that I'm steering rather than being a part of the engine. The problem that gets beyond that point that people often find is that they've recruited these people in, and actually, as the thing has grown, instead of it feeling exciting and you're handing more stuff over, it's starting to slow down. Silos are forming, decision-making is slowing, accountability seems poor, right? And that's because we all have an ego. We all want to play with our own train set. So if I'm recruited into your business as a leader in the business, or you're growing me into a position in as a leader in your business, I want to run my team. I want to own my team. And that's because that's how I identify myself, right? Psychologically, I identify myself with being that team and running that team. So straight away, it starts to cause me to have less connection with other teams within the business, and be suspicious of where they're trying to go and what they're trying to do. And are they trying to take funding and budget away from my team? Because I need this budget and I need to prove that I need this budget to do all this stuff. And there's never enough budget to go around. So we then end up in a situation inevitably of conflict within and competition within the business between teams. So before you get to that point, dealing with that sort of thing, helping people understand about conflict and how you manage conflict, building trust, all of the stuff that Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions would talk about, right? Starting off with a basis of trust that enables you to have conflict, that then enables you to commit to things. Building up through those levels becomes really important. But if you do that at the point at which things feel tough, it's harder than if you engage earlier and develop those people with that mentality and that mindset before you even get to that point.
So it sounds like at this point, as the company's evolving and as things are decentralizing, as you say, people are starting to lead their own teams, that as a founder, your own leadership role then needs to change, and that you need to redefine your role as that sort of senior leader. How do you do that? What does that look like?
Yeah. So some people are better at this than others. Some people naturally are looking to go hands off, right? I saw and I have seen over the years, a lot of different business leaders and a lot of leaders in different environments. And some are actively wanting to hand off, sit back and go with it. Others I find it really hard. And so they talk about handing off and they talk about empowerment. And this is a complaint that I got from an organization here in the Middle East, where 2 founders came to me, scaling a business, very successfully. It had 1,500 people in it, I think at this point, but kind of 250 people who were their core. And they were saying, we're having real problems with empowerment. We keep telling people that they're empowered and encouraging them to make decisions, but they're just not doing it. And so they were talking about it, but actually when we got into it, they hadn't really given the people who were saying you are empowered the psychological safety to make choices. So those individuals still felt like it was a risky thing to make a decision, because if it goes wrong, I could get in trouble. And they didn't have that sense of this is safe and I'm feeling protected and okay to do it. And because that wasn't happening, the leaders then inevitably, caused by the lack of tempo and the lack of speed within the business, would start stepping back in and taking control because they had to make things move forward. And that then sends mixed signals of, well, hang on a minute, you're telling me I'm empowered, but you keep stepping in and making decisions. So do you know what? I'm just going to sit here and just keep plodding along. So it is about thinking on how you are behaving in order to drive the culture and the activity that you want within the organization. We talked about that leadership shadow earlier on, being very, very aware of that, and that literally everything you say and your body language and everything else, can have a huge impact. And, I've fallen foul of this. I've been on team meetings where I've been feeling tired. I've been feeling under the cosh. I'm maybe jet lagged from going all over the place. Maybe I've had a really tough time at home and there's a problem domestically with the family or something like that. And I've come into a team meeting really flat and just, thought, right, I've just got to get through this meeting and I can get on with the next thing and then on with the next thing. And you realize as you see people exiting that meeting and you see their body language and you're like, just really messed up there. Because even when I'm feeling tough, sometimes, being a vulnerable leader and putting your hand up and saying, hey, look, folks, just to let you know that at the moment, and I obviously did this, I was on a team call with my team yesterday. And I, put my hand up and said, look, I'm a bit tired because I haven't been getting much sleep of late because of what's been going on in the region. There's nothing wrong with that, so that the team then give you a bit of latitude and understanding of where you are and what you're doing. But actually, thinking really hard about that shadow, about our behaviors, about how we act and the impact that has on people, that is super important.
And did that work for you? Because I guess for me, it's a fine line between being seen as a weak, if you're feeling a bit down and weak because of things happening in the region, you're a bit tired, then other people in your team are going to be feeling like that. Do you then need to be the strong leader, or do you need to be the vulnerable leader, or do you sort of somewhere in between where you're human but also, being quite confident?
I think for me, this comes back to the leadership by little things. It's about meeting each individual wherever they are. So for the people who are feeling really anxious and worried and concerned, then you are the leader that is projecting a sense of calm, confidence. This is all right. Don't worry. We'll get through this. Right. For the people who are looking okay and seemingly doing all right, being aware that might be a facade is important. And then that's all just their way of coping. So not presuming that they're okay. So I think it's not necessarily vulnerable leadership. It's not necessarily confident leadership. I'd say it's empathetic leadership. And people misunderstand that word empathy sometimes, because it sounds like sympathy. But empathy is all about understanding where the other person is and meeting them where they are. So those that need to be given a bit of confidence, you're giving a bit of confidence to. Those who are actually enjoying, weirdly, the experience, sharing that, you're doing your best, that's fine. So empathetic leadership, I think that's in that circumstance is really important.
How do you then develop yourself to be an empathetic leader? Because it doesn't come naturally to, I think, a lot of, especially a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of those who have come up with big ideas that are in their heads a lot because they've, they're the ones who have that drive and the ability to want to move forward. And sometimes it's a little bit hard, I think, for them to see and think about other people. I think one of the challenges I've seen, maybe not necessarily personally, but in other leaders, is just they almost feel like they have to be mind readers. If you're put in a room full of 10 different team members that are all feeling slightly different, how do you read their minds to work out who's got a facade on, who's being very vulnerable, and who's actually genuinely okay.
Look, leadership is like anything else. It's sport, right? You've got to train for it. And most commercial organizations are really poor at training for it. They'll spend the vast majority of their time with business as usual, getting through each day, and there may be the odd course or offsite or something like that here and there. Whereas elite sports teams, the military, the emergency services, if you look at any organization that is really, really high functioning, that most commercial organizations would look at and go, that is a really high functioning organization. Those high functioning organizations spend a huge amount of their time training, for the 5% of time that they're actually delivering. And I get it, and I understand it because it's partly to do with budgets, right? People are reluctant to spend money on leadership training. They're reluctant to spend money on developing themselves and their teams because it's seen as a cost rather than a benefit. But you have to do that if you're going to improve. You have to do that if you're going to scale your business. Businesses that have a good culture and strong leadership have been shown to be anywhere from 4 to 7 times the revenue of those that don't. So this has a material impact on the value of your business, on the revenues, the profitability, the productivity. If you've got the culture right within your organization, you can get 23% higher profitability, 17% higher productivity, 78% less churn in terms of an absenteeism from staff members. An investment in leadership has been done by a study in Duke University to show a return of anywhere between 3 and 11 times ROI. It's just that people feel it's a cost. So because it feels like a cost, rather than doing it, they just pay it lip service. So bluntly, and people would expect this from me, right? Because this is what we do. We do coaching, we do leadership development, we deliver courses accredited by the Institute of Leadership. Of course, I'm going to be championing that sort of stuff, but I'm not championing it because I want to push my business. I'm doing it because I want to push everybody's business. I want everybody to be successful. I come from a service background where you help people, and that's your job, right? And so I want everybody to be successful. And for me, the way that I know people will be more successful is by developing those skills so that they can read the room, can read the individuals, can lead in a better way, can become more strategic, so that the business then performs.
So is that the starting point? If you really don't have a pro training culture at the moment or a pro people culture, what would you start with?
From a leadership training and development perspective, anything is better than nothing. I'm not a huge fan of stuff that you can buy online and that is online courses about leadership. Because for me, leadership development is about discussing how you personally deal with certain situations and circumstances, listening to something and then asking questions back, But when I've been in this situation, I have found this, right? So we worked with a law firm that were looking to scale in the UK, in the northeast of the UK. And it was all about, how do we go? And they had never had any leadership development at all. So the senior partner's obsession was with fee earning hours. Rather than leading the teams and developing the teams. And they tried online learning packages before and it hadn't worked. And it hadn't worked because you've got a bunch of very bright, very capable, very intelligent people listening to something And it might cause a degree of reflection, but it's just reflection internally. Whereas if you go on to some sort of course or program, whether it be half a day or a bit longer, that allows the individuals on that course to push and to ask questions, and for you to ask questions of other people around you on the course. And it forces you to reflect rather than going, that was quite interesting. Now I'm into a day-to-day problem and I've actually just forgotten all about the stuff that I just listened to. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be epic. It can be, bits here and there. I guess the other recommendation I would make is to think about how you make it sticky. Again, a mistake that I see a lot of organizations make is let's contract and bring in a leadership course or a development course or some coaching. And this is a 2-day package. And we go off site for 2 days and you have this lift because you've been together for 2 days. It's been brilliant. And then it just returns straight back to normal afterwards. So maybe taking that 2 days and instead putting it into a series of 2-hour sessions that happen every month for 12 months, that now starts to make things sticky. You've used essentially the same amount of time, but you've created very different impact on the business.
So you've worked with organizations across a lot of different sectors. People only have to look at the Quirk website to see you've worked with everyone from professional services through to energy to other industrials. Tell us where you found that the work you've done, people work essentially, has really worked quite well. Pardon the pun.
Yeah, sure. So it often falls into 2 camps, regardless of the sector or the scale or the size or type of industry, whatever else it might be. It often falls into 2 camps. We're either growing really fast and struggling to keep up with ourselves, either through acquisition or just organic growth, or we just hit on this amazing opportunity and off we go. Or we've been doing this in a very set way for quite a long time. We're very set in our ways and we're finding it hard to change, but we know we've got to. So if I take 2 different examples there, not wishing to bore people, in the first one was with a technology company. And they were looking to grow really hard. It was the organization I mentioned earlier on, lots of acquisitions, bolting in other organizations. They weren't huge acquisitions. They were acquisitions of maybe 6 or 8 people each time, but they had a reasonable value. And the thing that they were then struggling with was the dilution of the culture, the creation of all these micro cultures as organizations were bolted in, but not then fully integrated. And they were really struggling with leadership because you now had technical leaders rather than people with leadership skills. So people being put in charge of a team of 60 who were literally last week leading a team of 6. And they've been put in charge of that team of 60 because technically they know what they're doing, but they've not been given that leadership development. So for them, we did a couple of different things. We helped with their culture diagnostic pre and post acquisition. So we help them understand, because we've got basically a tool that enables us to do a diagnostic of an organization's culture and leadership, where it is now and where people would like it to be in the future. So we can see where the delta are and we can look at it from different populations. So it became essentially part of the due diligence of an acquisition. So it's not just financial and legal due diligence, and it's not just the operational and processes or which ERP systems will we keep or not. It was, let's look at the cultures here. And when the cultures come together, where we're going to have problems and where we won't. So straight away, we started to help them through their cultural frictions as they came together being much lower. And they therefore achieved the expected benefits of the acquisition much quicker because the integration happened. And their leadership was scaling at the same time because we were running the leadership courses for them. So it really helped them take off and go where they wanted to go rather than, as you called it earlier on, getting heavier and heavier and heavier because nothing seemed to be working. On the flip side of that, we worked with an energy company who'd been doing the same thing in the same way for a very long time, 30 plus years, people very ingrained in their ways and attitudes. And leadership there was one where when you got to the top of the pyramid, that was your chance to be in the sunshine, and you'd spent all this time getting to that point. But those individuals were still leading like they had been led when they were apprentice 20 years earlier, and nothing had changed, right? So it was very command and control. It was very do this now in this way. And even if you're sitting there as the individual thinking, well, that's not going to work, you don't say that, you just do it. And it doesn't work, but you just get on with it because that's your day job and you just don't question it. So for them, it was much more of a transformation and change program that we ran, developing their leadership and taking them through that change program. And the way in which we went about that was to create transformation teams. We created 6 teams with mixed departments and mixed levels of seniority in each team. And we gave them basically a problem within the business to solve. And we helped coach them how they go about that, what they do. So rather than change being what it often is, where you get these change management consultancies that come in, look at the business, assess the business, and then say, this is what you need to do and walk away. We were doing what we call a learn and solve model. We're teaching you how to fix your own problems. You fix your own problems because now you own the solutions that you've come up with, and that starts to move you forwards. And they ended up, recently I was speaking to the CEO. He's now moved on to another organization and we're going to work with him there. But he was saying that they were now achieving in the energy company in a day what used to take them a week, simply through that better approach, that better culture, that better leadership style that had filtered down through the whole organization. Now, that took 18 months to put together and to make happen. So it's not an overnight thing, but those are 2 very different, I guess, examples of what we've done and how we've made a difference.
Very interesting. So just to finish off kind of the way we started, go full circle, if you were able to advise your earlier self at the start of, starting Quirk, or even just before that, I guess, when you had the rug pulled from underneath you, you could advise yourself, your former self now, what would you say, or what would you tell that person to do?
I would probably encourage that person to have...
Probably draw up a contract would be a good start.
Well, there was a contract, ironically.
See a lawyer.
And we all signed it. But no, it's... I would probably encourage that person to have the courage to pause a little bit and to go into a business, take the time and the pain on the financials and the difficult domestics to have gone and actually got a job somewhere and cut their teeth somewhere for a few years before doing what I'm doing now. I often get asked, would you do it differently? And people say, and if you wouldn't, then surely that's the wrong answer. And I think that we should all learn, we should all have a growth mindset, right? I have now come the point I'm at now, loved what I've done. And I get a great sense of achievement of what we've built. But that first 5-6 years was super tough. Constantly looking over my shoulder, constantly stressed about when the money is going to run out, where's the next client, how am I going to deliver it, who's going to deliver it, making errors around recruiting people into the business that weren't right, that then became very difficult, almost toxic, and we had to exit, and all those challenges and scales that I was not really equipped to do and to deal with because I'd never done it before. And the irony of going around and talking to businesses about how they should do things when I'm actually learning how to do a business myself. So I probably would recommend to that individual to go off and get a bit of experience elsewhere first. But equally, I think I'd go back to that individual and say, just have faith, and don't sweat it too much. I think I put myself under a huge amount of stress early on, worrying about everything. And that is normal. We all worry, even people with a pretty resilient background like me, commando trained and all the rest of it, right? We all worry. And I think helping that individual understand that options develop in front of you all the time, conversations all the time, people will pop up and just offer you jobs, things will develop that you weren't expecting. And if you find yourself really stuck, you can stop and start again, and lots of people do. So maybe taking some of that stress and that worry out, not with that sort of whole don't worry, be happy, but don't let it overwhelm you. Just go with it and trust the process.
Yeah, I see that. I see that in myself. I see that in a lot of business owners I work with. Everything does feel very heavy.
Yeah.
Heavy is probably a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Sitting on your chest, sitting in your gut, sitting on your shoulders. Probably don't worry so much and just give it some time. If you have the luxury of time, then things will work out really well for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just keep building those relationships and doing your best, and things will get there.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it perfectly there with relationships. I'm always happy to sit down with people and have a conversation, no matter who they are. And it's got no commercial aspect to it at all. If people are having a tough time, I'm happy to talk to them. I'm happy to sit there and act as a foil. And there will be lots of people like me in everybody's sphere of connections and networks. So sometimes actually taking opportunity to not carry it all at work, protect the family when you go home by not saying anything at home because you don't want to worry the family, and everything becomes internalized and difficult. Actually meeting up with people, sharing with people, talking to people, kicking it around with people, whether that be on a walk or, in a bar or a restaurant or whatever you like doing. I think leaning on other people is a big part of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It definitely, it's helped me in my own businesses to just find people like you, Chris, quite frankly, who are there for you. There's no commercial interest involved. You're just there to help each other out and to bounce some ideas off. And that's where so much inspiration comes from, I think. So very grateful to you for giving your time and space to us today and all your sage advice. Definitely, I think if I'm going to take two things from it, I would say it's people before operations, which is a very interesting one because most of us think in terms of operations and what systems have got to be in place rather than the people first. And intent, having your intent, knowing your intent and evolving that intent. Those are the learnings that I've taken out of it. So hopefully everybody else did too. Chris, for those who want to find you and have a chat, what's the best way to get in touch?
So they can get in touch just by emailing me direct. I'm chris@quirkme.com. So it's obviously for Quirk Middle East. And yeah, they can get in touch through there or through LinkedIn. You'll find me if you search up Chris Paton and on LinkedIn with Quirk. And if you put those two together, you'll find me.
Perfect. So thanks again, Chris, for joining us. Much appreciated, and look forward to hearing more of your sage advice as we go along.
Perfect.
For our audience, that's it for this episode of Muhami Matters. A massive thanks to Chris Paton for joining us, sharing his honest insights into why growth becomes harder what leaders have to change to make us sustainable. As I said, people before operations, and knowing your intent and evolving that intent is what I've taken from this. If today's conversation resonated for you, it may be a signal to step back, examine your leadership, look at the structure and clarity of what's around you, and see how it needs to evolve. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your network. For more insights and support, visit muhami.ae or connect with me at CJA Consulting. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered. Thank you for joining us on Muhami Matters. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe and connect with me to stay updated. Join me again soon as we continue to bring you credible insights, practical strategies, and trusted advice to empower your professional journey. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.